Tonight's conversation, the FAQ on FMBs and RTDs, that's flavored malt beverages, ready to drink, often canned cocktails, for those who haven't seen it before. Kate, Jamie, Jess, you might know them, you might have read their work. Kate at Good Beer Hunting and Craft Beer Brewing, Jamie, the co-founder and editorial director at that magazine as well. Jess, reporter at Brewbound, who both Kate and Jess have been on our panels before, so you might recognize them. Jamie, thanks a bunch for joining us. So we're going to get into it. And to start things off, Jamie, I do want to talk about the most recent issue of Craft Beer and Brewing, because if you have not seen it, for those who are with us, this is the cover. The cover story is about a smoothie seltzer. And Kate wrote this, so Kate will jump in with you in just a moment to talk about reporting on this story. But Jamie, could you give us a little bit of background about why it was that this was something that deserved to be the cover story?
So, Brian, I think you got to back up first. That is the Brewing Industry Guide, which is our business-to-business magazine. But in the same month, we have also put hard seltzer on the cover of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, kind of in a split cover with Saison, the consumer side of our media. And so we've doubled down on it. It's not even just one of our magazines, it's both of our magazines in that same kind of time. But having said that, like it's of the moment. It's current, whether you like it or not. It is something that is happening. It's something that breweries are making, and brewery, like you've got a brewery like Holmes and Smooge in Michigan, and they are in one of the top 10 breweries on Untapped with this smoothie brand that has just kind of come out of nowhere, which was a COVID project. And I think that not covering it would be ignoring, this kind of elephant in the room, that these are products that are connecting with consumers, that drinkers are enjoying to drink, and that even if they are not the cool things that all of us want to cover because they gain us credibility with our friends, like it's something that's real, that's happening within this world that we're in.
What was it, Jamie, what was it in terms of considering that dual cover selection and those stories and the importance of the stories? What was the lead up to decide that it is this elephant in the room that can't be ignored anymore?
Some of it's, of course, market dynamics, and some of it is watching, both the kind of cultural backlash against it and also what it means to the breweries that embrace it. We have viewed this in the way that we have viewed other more quote unquote populist kinds of styles of alcoholic beverages made by craft brewers, not just through this lens of focused traditionalism, which tends to want to maintain a narrow canon for craft beer that is based on like Northern European beer history. What we have found, though, is that beers like this or products like this and hard seltzer expand the canon. It threatens some people. You find a lot of backlash to it, but at the same time, it opens this whole category of craft to consumers that might not view themselves as part of it. Generally speaking, that's a broader audience in terms of age. It's a broader audience in terms of gender. It's a broader audience in terms of race and ethnicity. And I think that cutting that piece of it off is not telling a full story about, number one, the kind of craft creation that's possible within the creativity that craft brewers express, and two, the potential to connect those brewers to audiences that may not feel like they have a connection to what we might call craft beer.
Yeah, this is going to be a perfect opportunity for me to plug my bi-monthly comment for everyone on the call that covering the industry, like Jamie was talking about, goes far more than what we might have traditionally thought. And to look beyond, it's not just a beer writer. It is a journalist, and as a journalist, it's all of these things that kind of encompass us in our coverage area. And so, Jamie, thank you for pointing out the value of what this is, because that becomes a really big deal. Kate, I want to put that big deal in context too. We're talking about specifically Smooge here. I'm going to share this really quick. So this was from your story, from your reporting, just to give a highlight of it, that you can see the speed of which this became popular for the brewery. It went from no publication to selling out in 2 hours, to crashing the online ordering system. This is the kind of thing that I think we so often associate with, the hype releases for a select handful of breweries around the country. And this came from a place of people not knowing what this was, to all of a sudden changing the dynamics for this brewery. So Kate, in reporting this story, we're talking about Holmes and Smooge in particular here. What was it that you took away that maybe lends to some of what Jamie's talking about how covering these categories, flavored malt beverages in particular, in this case, goes, well beyond the importance of just telling stories from within beer specifically?
Yeah, first of all, I was super excited to report this story. I feel like Jamie is making it sound like we were reluctantly backed into this, but I was like, yes, I'm so glad this is my assignment. And I think that excitement from me came from excitement that I was hearing from drinkers. Like, I had heard these little whispers about this thing called Smooge, and it that kind of just organic, I don't know what this is, I'm kind of curious to try it. What's it going to taste like? Have you had it? That felt to me like beers we were talking about 5 to 7 years ago. It felt like the same emotion, right? The sense of discovery, the sense of being excited about a new product from, maybe a brewery that you've had other things from, but you haven't had this, and it's going to be totally different. And that was what I heard from the folks at Holmes, was we've pushed the boundaries of beer before. We've done sour IPAs. We've done these really fruited kettle sours and stuff. We've been pushing this envelope. And so this really doesn't feel that weird for us. This just feels like the next way to bring more flavors and get people something that they haven't had yet. And so when you put it in that context, it doesn't feel like such a radical shift. It just feels like an evolution of a craft brewery continuing to push the envelope and just happening to do it with a malt-based beverage that is not beer, precisely.
Talk a little bit about too, because in your story, it is not just focused on people who make it, but you had an interview with a beer enthusiast who hosts a podcast in Detroit. Can you talk a little bit about the consumer side and what they were seeing, just to, I guess, lend some depth to what you're talking about too?
Yeah, so I definitely wanted to, for a story like this, to hear just what kind of beer enthusiasts in Michigan were thinking. So I called Harry Weaver III, who hosts the Brews Brothers podcast out of Detroit. And he was great because he's like, I don't really like seltzer, but everyone was talking about Smooge. I had to try it. I wanted to try it with my friends. Once I tried it, I had to admit it was amazing. And then I was turning other people onto it. And again, that just feels like that same sense of discovery and excitement that so many of us have had with beer or other alcohol products. It felt like exactly the same emotion. And so I think, now with how easily accessible, amazing beer is, and how many different flavors and permutations of beer you can find, it is getting harder to give some people something they really truly have not tried and don't even know what exactly it will taste like, except pina colada. So it was cool to hear. It was cool to hear that. And then, once I wrote that, I had friends DMing me wanting to know what this thing tasted like. That's how these products get people excited, and it feels very genuine.
Jess, I think one of the words that would be used to describe what Kate is talking about, for better or worse, I suppose, is innovation. And that was a word that was tossed around quite a bit. So for those of you who didn't tune in, Jess spent the day hosting the Brew Talks events for Brewbound, the second of which was focused on this Beyond Beer segment too. So I don't want to start off by just simply asking you, why is beer so boring right now? But instead, let's talk first about, from the conversation, you were talking with a distributor, somebody from Boston Beer, and somebody else who I'm forgetting.
Katie from Ranch Water.
Yes, Katie Beal Brown from Lone River, producer of Ranch Water as well. What was it about that conversation that you found to be particularly interesting in the context of which we're talking about this emerging category, these kinds of innovations?
So if you kind of look at, the whole beer category, core beer versus all these other things, beer would not have grown much in 2020 were it not for this. We can't really call them flavored malt beverages because they're not. This, I guess, what Jim Cook has been calling the fourth category in that op-ed he wrote. So this is really delivering a lot of growth to the industry, and we're not really getting it from many other places right now. So that's definitely makes it a thing that we all need to be aware of,
Yeah, so there was a data point from Bart Watson of the BA when he was talking about the 2020 year for BA defined craft breweries, that they actually, if you added in the FMBs, so predominantly hard seltzer that they produced last year, that is the only way that they had a positive turn in terms of the challenges that they faced in 2020. So I do want to come back to that half joking question though, Jess, because of all the things that you guys could have talked about, brew talks, there are a whole host of talks, right? Topics that you could have on. This one was really important. So why is this so valuable from a reporting perspective, from storytelling, from understanding the industry? Why is that so important right now?
I mean, this is how the industry is growing, which I feel like I just said. But I mean, when you look at who we had on that panel, so we had Dave Berwick, who's the CEO of Boston Beer. Boston Beer's biggest brands right now are not Sam Adams and Angry Orchard, they're Twisted Tea and Truly Hard Seltzer. So Dave brings a really important perspective. And the hard seltzer category, I don't have to tell you guys, is dominated by two really big players and then some medium players. And then that's kind of it. So Truly's number 2 to White Claw. And our third panelist was Katie Beal Brown, who founded Lone River Ranch Water, which she sold to Diageo in March. Ranch Water, I didn't know of until really, I think until we met her last year. It's based on a Texas cocktail that's a combination of tequila, club soda, but usually Topo Chico, a little bit of simple syrup and lime. Katie's Ranch Water is a malt base. I mean, I feel like, Brian, I'm getting a little too in the weeds here. So if you want me to pull back, I can. But
I think this is fine too, because for those of us on the call who maybe aren't in the weeds in knowledge, I do think there is, as we're talking about understanding the industry and the ways that we can do a reporting better, I feel free, please do explain.
Well, so what makes this really relevant to anybody who's interested in craft beer, Bart Watson, who's the, you guys all know, the chief economist for the Brewers Association, in his big survey this year, he asked breweries, did you make a hard seltzer? Did you dabble in Beyond Beer? And a lot did, but the median size of the brewers that did was 500 barrels. So this isn't just really big breweries launching hard seltzer brands. You have that too. Oscar Blues launched Wild Basin a couple years ago. So you'll see that, and you'll see a lot of pretty major craft players launching standalone brands. But this has been a lot of really small breweries, and some of them are maybe just doing it for their tap rooms, just to have another option for people who don't drink beer. But some of them are starting to package. So it's definitely something that's being explored industry-wide.
Jess, that actually connects very nicely. We had a question submitted ahead of time, and I'll remind everybody too, if you have a question, Feel free to either drop it in the chat box to everyone. You can direct message me. I'm happy to ask it on your behalf if you don't want your name attached to it as well. But Jess, there was a question that Michelle had sent in. She was curious about regional FMBs versus national and what happens. I think specifically she was curious about hard seltzer because she was asking about what happens when you pull out Truly, White Claw, the new Topo Chico hard seltzer, etc. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of the volume that exists that we also may not see because this is a tap room only or very small release thing. I have an answer to that, but before I give that, Jess, I am curious just in terms of the conversations you've had when you think about that national versus small or regional. Do you feel like regional and small is like getting some extra pull right now? Or is the attention still just 8% White Claw and Truly?
Imperial Seltzer. So I don't know because those small regional brands don't pop in scan data, at least the scan data that I get. But there definitely are a lot of them. Like there's a lot of big players like Braxton Brewing outside of Cincinnati has Vive. Vive is pretty huge. But there's also been like, Kate, you reported on this. Funky Buddha is expanding their hard seltzer. Like there's like, I think you'll see a lot of craft brewers that are in like the 20 to 50,000 barrel range that are all kind of playing in this space. And some of them are finding a lot of success. And some people are really like right now I'm drinking a Two Robbers, which they're a regional brand in Philly that just got some big investment. They're kind of expanding a little north and a little south, but mostly focused on the East Coast. So they think that their case here is that they're a local, authentic, original brand that is independent, stands on its own. And they think that that story plays well. I mean, obviously, they wouldn't keep making it and they wouldn't have gotten this big investment round if it didn't. But one thing that the founders told me was that they were able to find a big niche in the on-premise pre-COVID because they had, they would approach these, trendy, hip cocktail-centric bars in Philly who wanted to offer a hard seltzer of sorts, but they wanted it to have more of a craft credential. So that was where they're really, Samra, their social is great. That was like really how they were able to fit in. And that's their selling story. So I have to assume if it's working for them, that same story will work through other parts of the country. It's just a matter of the on-premise getting back open.
Yeah, and to give context to that too. So it's when looking at IRI data, so this is going to be off-premise chain retail and liquor stores from across the country. It's really hard to turn this into a direct apples to apples comparison because we're talking about the largest brands in the world in hard seltzer who can be found pretty much everywhere. So saying in pure raw dollars is not particularly fair because, White Claw is going to sell like $2.5 billion worth. But here's the context I do want to give. And Jamie, I'm going to kick a question to you in just a second, asking about what's next for this category to maybe help push us a little further in conversation. So if you remove the biggest of the big players, so this would be, White Claw, Truly, Bud Light, Corona, Vizzy, yada, yada, yada. If you look at what's happened in terms of year-to-year growth, I'm looking at the numbers now. These hard seltzer brands, all hard seltzer, basically tripled its dollar sales in IRI chain stores the last 3 years in a row. But if you look just at what would be considered regional brands, so this would be these ones that are made by large craft breweries or regional craft breweries or, the small players, the numbers there from 2019 to 2020 grew about 3.5 times in raw dollar sales. So that's like as close as I could get to thinking about this in terms of what happens when we look at, the small guys, that we can actually look at their sales data and see that the comparison of regional brands to all of hard seltzer is actually almost in lockstep. Like it's performing strongly, partially because it has so many new entrants, but there is a lot going on there in terms of interest, like you were talking about, Jess. And Jamie, this leads to a question that we got from Evan, who was curious about, Evan had asked, outside of better for you and low alcohol RTDs, so that would be, I guess, canned cocktails. Evan was curious about where we see FMBs going in the future. So knowing that, you know, the innovation that we're talking about, or at least interest in new experiences is there, that interest in small or regional produced items is there as well. And what maybe you've learned from your own talking with your staff and conversations with industry professionals, what is it that you see that is, I guess, next? Where is it that you see things going for this category?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of important things have already been said here, but I think it's also possible to lose sight of what's happening on the small and craft side of this entire sector. By focusing on those big folks. And I think it's also, you know, as we're looking at it from a journalistic framework, important to understand that hard seltzer will also mirror the same kind of dynamic that we see in larger macro beer versus craft beer, that, you know, 80%, 85% of the market is going to be large mass marketed products. And there's also going to be this 15% of the market that is smaller, but also more potentially more creative, more responsive, and more, you know, direct, you know, aimed at different kinds of audiences. And just because it's small doesn't mean that it's not worth talking about. I think that's also where a lot of the creativity ends up being driven from. You know, we tend to focus on breweries that are, or, you know, large brewers that are growing big and, you know, making up giant billion-dollar numbers because they're selling, you know, a shitload of hard seltzer. But this category is just as important to, you know, folks like where I'm from, Denver, Lady Justice Brewing, you know, a small, like maybe they'll brew 150 barrels of beer this year, but I've got their hard seltzer in my fridge because my wife doesn't love beer, but she wants to go to that brewery and she wants to support them as a business because of what they stand for. And that's the product that she'll drink when we go there together. And I think that's a compelling and interesting, you know, kind of angle for this, that, you know, and on top of that, like, over, you know, last December, my youngest son was, you know, just diagnosed with celiacs. And so, you know, I have also been focusing on, like, what does that craft experience look like for people that can't consume gluten? You know, like, he will not have the beer experience that I have because he cannot drink these things. Is there a way for him to connect with craft brands and craft businesses that are making interesting and compelling beverages on a small scale and doing it in a creative and artisanal way, you know, but in a way that doesn't include gluten and then doesn't spread out into, you know, distilled spirits or wine and other kinds of beverage categories. And I think that that's one of those cool pieces that this kind of hard seltzer category fulfills, that it's a way for creative craft brewers to, you know, flex that creativity, and to use the kind of creative templates that they've already built in beer, whether that's sour fruited beer or whether, you know, that is adjuncted creative things, or whether that is clean and crisp and, you know, precise, kinds of beverages, and think about how people can relate who may not be able to otherwise engage in the beer category. I think there is an amazing and huge future in that, in the craft category. And I would not be surprised if we see entire categories like, you know, fruited, what we might now call fruited Berliner Weiss, or, you know, American sour fruited beers, almost move entirely into this gluten-free hard seltzer base, so that these quote unquote beers or whatever these beverages end up becoming called, are more accessible to larger audiences who may not be able to, you know, consume beer as we know it.
Jamie, I want to pause on that because you got me thinking about something. Kate, I'm going to kick it to you in a moment too, because Jamie, the way that you're talking about it there, reflects, I think, broader themes and conversations of which we've had in these chats, and which I've certainly had with our peers and people in the industry. This, the mixing of experiences that effectively remove categories. So we've thought for so long, and this gets back to what Jess had mentioned, calling out the fourth category, for example, that, you know, the three traditional categories, we've got, you know, beer, wine, and spirits. But what you're talking about, in the way that I hear it, it moves beyond just categorization, but thinking about it in terms of what that experience might be, whether it's flavor focused or in its experience that I can have because of dietary restrictions, things like that. Is that something that you are understanding as well, that this kind of hard, rigid categorization is maybe breaking down a little to maybe allow greater play across these things?
Also, geographical access, you know, that, you know, this kind of, you know, breweries more and more commonly are also this third space social environment for people. You know, this past year has sucked for that, but, you know, before that and now, as we are starting to see things reopen, like the tap room that I'm in right now in Bellingham, Washington at Aslan, you know, these are spaces where people go to, and those spaces, you know, are increasingly taking the place of the neighborhood bars that have all closed en masse for the last 15 years. I mean, it's something like 12,000 neighborhood bars that have closed over the last 15 years. They've been in large part replaced by breweries and by places that are creating their own products. And so if those places are going to fulfill the need that they have socially, they also need to have products that more and more people can consume when they're there, that are accessible and broad-based, and not necessarily in this tightest definition of craft beer that we may, you know, have been purporting in the past. You know, that you know, the place matters also, in addition, you know, to these, you know, broader categories.
Kate, I like the way that this is kind of veering too, because so often I feel like the narrative around these kinds of brands and products gets kind of turned into very simplistic storylines. And we had a question from Brandon that asked about health and wellness. You and I have talked about this before. The question is that we're still with hard seltzers, but I do want to open this up. Feel free to talk about canned cocktails, because this is increasingly the better for you conversation about canned cocktails matters too. That the question was about these have exploded due to health and wellness macro trends in all industries, but with higher alcohol and calorie innovations, does seltzer eventually break from its better for you association? I want to tack onto that too. Was that ever an actual full-on true narrative?
I think whether it was true, there was some truth to it, of course. It's not like people weren't drinking seltzer for lower calories, lower carbs, for sure. Those people existed, they still exist. But I think their importance might have been overstated when we're talking about the rise of hard seltzers. There was a great anecdote from Boston Beer Company on Brew Talks today, talking about how one of the original like merch items or little swaggy things for Truly was yoga mats, which was totally how I think people spun the hard seltzer category in the beginning. And then it turned out that college bros just wanted to shotgun them anyway. You know, it wasn't always about the carbs. We wanted to do the same things with those products that we do with other products. So I think, you know, it's not to say that it's one or the other. I think it's certainly a mix of things that are drawing people to hard seltzers, to RTDs. And let's also consider that the idea of better for you means entirely different things to different people, right? Like for me, it might be calories. For you, it might be carbs. For someone choosing an RTD beverage, it might be like clean ingredients, which are dicey as all get out, but like that definitely matters to people. Like, oh, this is all natural flavorings, whatever that natural flavoring means. You know, like these are categories that are not fixed in people's minds. And I think when we're talking about an 8% White Claw, I doubt anyone is choosing that for its health and wellness benefits. Prove me wrong. But I think it's fair to say that, one, those are not, people choose these for different reasons, and that better for you is not one single definition either.
Yeah, I want to come back to that real quick, Kate. How do we reconcile what is now a competing narrative, where the better for you because it's low calorie and lower ABV is now being replaced by what is, again, I'm bandying this word around innovation. It's not an innovation if you're adding 3% ABV, but if the move is to create an 8% alcohol version of that product, now we're talking about something that's twice plus more many calories, higher in alcohol. So it's technically worse for you. What have you learned from your reporting, thinking about that new space of hard seltzer, the high alcohol versions that now creates this kind of, I guess, tension here?
Yeah, I mean, there's high alcohol. I can't recall what the calories in that 8% White Claw are, but it's certainly no like diet drink. Smooge is 5% alcohol and like 300 calories per 12-ounce can. So like that is not truly. But I think what that shows me is that the seltzer market is fracturing the same way any other category fractures. Like there are people who are going to be served by the low carb, by the low calorie stuff. And then there are people who are not motivated by that and are instead searching for the really intensely flavored stuff, maybe at a higher ABV. So it's like, that shows the evolution of this category entirely, because there are now subsets within the category. So, I mean, to me, that shows that seltzer drinkers are not a monolith, and this category is going to become more niche. Now you have like hard kombuchas, and like, do those fit somewhere in the hard seltzer universe? I think so, if you're talking about who the drinkers are. So this is only going to become muddier and more fractured and serving more niches now that people know what the heck it is.
Yeah, so we've been chatting for about 35 minutes, and this is the second time where I've had the big red flag go off, where I just have to ask the question, like, is beer cool anymore? Kate,
yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to whom, right? Like, again, with the fracturing of things, like, of course beer is still cool and exciting to people. Is it exciting to every single person? No. And that's why things like hard seltzer exist. Or a product that I just had that I never knew I needed in my life is Shacksbury Cider's Easy Wine brand. It's 5% ABV canned wine. Holy crap. So like, again, I didn't even know that was a thing I really needed in my life. And now I think it's the best thing I've put in my fridge in a while. And so it's just like, that doesn't mean that I stopped drinking beer. It means that I found a new thing that I like too. I am not the biggest hard seltzer fan, like as just on a consumer level, like my personal preferences, but these things all have a place in my rotation. Like sometimes I want X thing. I think we have more tools to get to the exact experience that we want. And people are just taking that power into their own hands. So it's not like, what's cool, what's not. It's like, what do I want right now in this exact moment?
Full on mood modulation. I am going to direct people to the chat box. Jamie, thank you. I think this is a really good question, so I'm going to prompt people to maybe ponder it. Can breweries remain cool even if beer isn't? But Jess, I want to turn to a question that we received. We actually got two questions related to tax laws. So let's get real sexy with politics and law.
Oh, this is so exciting.
So this question came from Michael, and he asked, key members in the beer industry are strongly opposed to the distilling industry's efforts to lower the excise tax rate of low ABV RTD cocktails from spirits to that of FMBs, which is categorized as beer. I'm going to pause there for a second because I do want to give the opportunity. This is something you've reported on, Jess. Could you just give like a quick elevator pitch of what we mean when we talk about the uneven tax laws for these things?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the federal level, beer, wine, and spirits all get taxed at different rates. And to Rob's point, yes, this also varies by state. So if this couldn't get any more confusing, you have 3 different things at the federal government level, and then, 50 different versions of all sorts of things. Because some states even have carve outs for cider outside of wine, stuff like that. So I think this whole conversation kind of kicked off like a month and a half ago when Jim Koch published, wrote an open letter to the beer industry trade group heads saying how, well, I guess it really started before then with Discus, which is the trade association that represents distillers. He's really trying to make a push to argue that their lower ABV items, their, 5% ABV canned cocktails, should be able to pay the beer excise tax rate because those things are equal at the ABV level. And obviously beer does not want that to happen because this is their one advantage in the world, is that beer is taxed at a lower rate than other things. So do you want to get into market access or do you want to stop there?
Yeah, let's go to the second part. Thank you very much. That's super, just setting up the context. I appreciate that because I want to go to the second part of this question. I'm going to post this in the chat box as well for everybody while I read it, just so everyone can follow along. So the question that it ends with is, other than protecting their own interests by artificially limiting a competitor's access to market, is there any practical reason for beer makers to have this stance?
So I don't know if any of you guys have ever joined me, Kate, and Dave Infante. We do a bi-weekly chat on beer topics, and we hit this a couple weeks ago. And my original take on this had been, well, distillers have a higher tax rate, but they're licensed to make this product that they can sell at much higher margins. So if they're choosing to make a lower ABV product that has lower margins for them, then that's their choice. However, my husband, who's a history teacher and is asleep on the couch right now, also teaches prohibition. That's kind of part of his curriculum. Pointed out to me, he's like, Jess, like, they're taxed higher because their ABVs have a much higher capacity for creating ills in society. So if it's the same ABV as beer, then why isn't it just treated like beer? So that's, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know. Kate, what do you think?
I asked Jim McGreevy, the CEO of the Beer Institute, this question directly because I was like, and I did the reporter thing where you go, some would say, Jim, that this doesn't make any sense because if it's the same ABV, it's doing the same social ill, And his response, which one I guess could expect from a trade group that represents breweries, is that yes, but take our products on the whole. Beer on the whole is still the drink of moderation, is still the drink of social 3 to 4 beverages, especially like in the on-premise, like that's where beer lives and like that's its purpose, and liquor is not that, and therefore its producers should be taxed at a higher rate for the general I guess we're going to call it harm that they can do socially. And so that's kind of his stance on that, is that categorically these are different products, even if individually this 5% ranch water, how is that different than a 5% canned margarita? He wants to argue it on the category level.
And basically this one differentiation, this one advantage that the beer category has is almost like the last line of defense. Like, like the Night King and the White Walkers are like right outside the wall. And this is the last thing we have to hold on to our market share from spirits.
Yeah, to give context to this, because Jess, the picture you're painting
is a little dire
and realistic, is that, and this is not hyperbole, is that if you look out 3 to 4 years in the future, that there's no situation in which beer does not perform worse than it is today. Now, what portions of beer is what matters most there, because right now it's craft, imports, and premium plus, which is effectively Michelob Ultra, are all doing fine and good, fine to good, I should say. And so, the kind of the long tenured, the large macro brands are not doing so well, but the onset of, adult alternative beverages, the FMBs, the RTDs, Twisted Tea, Four Loko, Steel Reserve, these things do sell a lot. that the positioning that this tax rate for beer as kind of it's maybe the last silver bullet that exists is very real. And so for the three of you, and Jess, we'll stick with you because we've got you right now. Like, in terms of storytelling, both right now and maybe what you're experiencing and talking to people, how do you see this playing out in conversations? Like, what is this in real time? Because this is a relatively new story. What are the conversations you're having here? So maybe others on the call can better understand this kind of context.
Great question. So we launched a new video series at Brewbound this year called Retail Pulse. It's part of our monthly video series where we sit down with a beer buyer for a retailer. So we've had Jason Murphy from Buffalo Wild Wings and Mary Guyver from Whole Foods Market. They said all of the new products they got for resets this year, overwhelming majority were like not beer, like products from brewers, but people are sending them hard seltzer, hard kombucha, like canned cocktails. Like, they got way, way more of that stuff than beer. So brewers realize this and they're doing it. So,
Jamie, I think when you were sharing about the editorial decisions for craft beer and brewing, when we started this conversation about the importance of making sure that you weren't ignoring these segments, I think you set it up very nicely about, the value both to readers, the industry, of what that means. So in context of these things that we're talking about right now too, so maybe beyond just, the small producers focusing on this, what are some of the things that you're hearing, you're talking about with people in the industry about how these categories are kind of colliding and what it means?
To answer that, I would kind of look at this through two different lenses. On the first lens, in our consumer magazine, Craft Beer Brewing, we decided to engage in, a major focus for the issue on that, which involved reviewing, 80 to 100 different hard seltzers through our blind review process. And, when we thought about doing that, my first reaction was just fucking panic. How are a bunch of grizzled, old, generally speaking, white, males, and we have had women on that panel in the past, we don't currently, like, how are they going to respond to this? And I was like, like one of our judges in particular, he's a huge Rauch beer fan. Like, how is that guy gonna respond to drinking hard seltzer, And so, there was that general feeling of initial panic, like maybe this is a terrible idea. Maybe we shouldn't even, try to do this through our process like this. Going through that process was eye-opening. And these old school beer judges, some of whom have been doing for 20 plus years, really, and they didn't know what to think of it. There's no style guidelines for judging hard seltzer. There's no, BJCP rules, for what these things should be. And there's no GABF, style guidelines. Like, none of that exists. And so, we had to embark in this and figure out, like, how do we create a guideline for even judging this so that people have a framework to do it? But what we found is that while some of the products scored very poorly, a significant number of them, just when judged as beverages by this group of experienced beer judges that have been doing this for as long as they have, like, they scored surprisingly well. And all of my fears of having to adjust for them or trying to create context, and all of those other pieces weren't as necessary as I thought that they were. That when tasting them objectively and thinking about flavor, when you're not looking at a brand and you're simply looking at a product, and how it looks from a glass and then on your palate and how you respond to that flavor, taking all of that other baggage and putting it aside, they're not that bad. They're actually, some of them are quite compelling, like really interesting and engaging as beverages. to the point where that same judge, who's a humongous Rauch beer fan, was taking notes after I let him know which products those were, so that he could go buy them because he wanted to drink them again. And so, again, we bring our own cultural baggage to this based on our own history in this world of beer. But I think that when you get beyond that and start purely looking at it in terms of taste, like, it's actually quite a bit different than we want to think that it is. And so, and even within our own office, I mean, our office staff, after we got a care package of Smooge, like, I can't give enough lagers away in our office. I can't give away enough IPAs. Everyone's fridges are full of all of the extra beer that comes in from those reviews. And nobody wants any more of that, to the point where, like, the bike shop and the beer bar next to us, they get so many IPAs and so much extra lager and everything else. But I'll tell you, the Smooge, oh my God. Like, we went from, trying to talk people into taking beer, to our staff saying, how can we invite Holmes and Smooge to our Minnesota Craft Beer Festival, because we have to have more of that. Can they ship us more? Where do I find it? Can we talk any local breweries into making a product like this so that we don't have to go get it from Michigan? And the energy around that was actually really crazy. And so, I think that as much as we build these kinds of barriers based on our history with these things and whatnot, that the products themselves, when you drink them, some of them are really good.
What was the biggest misconception that you overcame in going through that process, Jamie?
I think the biggest thing to overcome was myself, and wanting to create the apologetics around this that were not necessary. Trying to overly massage the context so that, we didn't end up with a train wreck out of it, was actually the wrong strategy. And simply letting people taste them objectively and judge them as beverages, and how, because all of us, we like to, we're not just working in a beer context, working in a beverage context. We all drink other things. We all drink mixed well, I shouldn't say we all do, but a lot of us will drink, cocktails. We'll drink things like LaCroix. We drink things like Topo Chico. We drink wine. Carbonated wine, not carbon. Like, we have all of this broad beverage experience that we bring to bear on this. And thinking about hard seltzer only in a beer context, only relating to beer, isn't really fair to it. And trying to overly massage that context, people can taste them. They either work or they don't. What we found certainly was that naturally flavored, fruit juice flavored products rather than more synthetically flavored products certainly scored better with our judges. And that worked across the boards. That was one broader kind of takeaway that we found. And that craft producers, just as brewers of craft beer, span in quality from mediocre to excellent, so do craft hard seltzer producers.
Kate, we'll come over to you. I guess the question maybe has changed a little bit, and I actually like the one that was posted in the chat box talking about innovation. So you've done reporting about seltzer, you've done reporting about non-alcoholic beer, you've done reporting about RTD cocktails. When you think about the rush of products that are entering the market right now, is there a way to deduce something that is exciting versus boring? Say if it's not endorsed by a celebrity, like, is there something that you've kind of gained from your reporting that signifies something makes a difference?
Yeah, I think there are winners and losers in FMBs and RTDs the way there are in beer. Not every new beer works. But I think where you really have the opportunity to win in RTDs and FMBs is actually in true innovation. So the word innovation gets thrown around all the time. People call their line extensions innovation, and it pisses me off because you added 2% ABV and a lime flavor. That's not innovation, that's a line extension. Anyway, anybody else? No? Okay. But true innovation is creating a product that didn't exist. It's creating a flavor that didn't exist. It's creating something people could buy that they didn't know they needed, like me in this 5% canned wine, or like some people in ranch water. Like literally people had never heard of ranch water. That's innovation. So I think when you really are scoring a big win, I mean, it's creating a new category and then being the market leader in that category. So there's still there's less chance to do that in beer, right? Like the last time a beer did that on a massive scale was Michelob Ultra, because it kind of created a thing that didn't exist. It's like not a light beer, it's low carb, whatever. But in RTDs and FMBs, that door is still open. So you can be the first of something that someone tries and loves, and that is incredibly powerful.
I saw for the first time this week, at least that I can remember, the use of the word expression in lieu of innovation, or as you're saying, Kate, very accurately, I would say line extension. The challenge here with the variety of things coming into the market makes everything very interesting, which is why we are here talking about all this tonight. We're going to do one quick swoop through our panelists again. I'll say thanks to everyone who joined us. Jess, we'll go right back in this order. Jess, Jamie, and Kate. I think I want to come back to the question where we started, Jess, actually. Evan had asked about what's next, because I'm curious, in having heard and been a part of this conversation from what we're chatting about, if there is something that maybe has come to mind or that we haven't yet talked about when you think about what it means to think about what's next, especially from a reporting context.
So I think what we're seeing in this year's crop of new seltzer and seltzer adjacent products is a lot of collaboration between like big non-alc brands and then brewers. So like say like Topo Chico hard seltzer, you know, Coca-Cola owns it. They've teamed up with Molson Coors to produce it. You also have Coop Aleworks in Oklahoma is partnering with Sonic. So I think what a lot of these things are doing, I mean, not Topo Chico, but the Sonic thing really plays on, you know, nostalgia. And I think there's, Bryan, you talk about this all the time online. Like, it's basically like, let's think of a beverage that we all have fond memories of from when we were kids and make it boozy. So that's kind of, I think that's a big wave of what we're seeing. But I'm also seeing a ton of breweries get distiller's license, start distilling, and make canned cocktails. I've seen a good amount of that. I would love for Capri Sun for sure. And personally, Wawa fruit punch. I misspent a lot of my youth drinking Wawa fruit punch with really crappy vodka. So yeah, those are the two things that I really kind of see. I mean, you're right about like taking the ABV up on White Claw and Truly is not really any kind of innovation. But
Jamie, I don't know if we should be expecting a craft beer and brewing edition on canned cocktails produced by breweries, but that does also connect to what you were talking about before in terms of these small businesses just identifying ways that they have to, you know, change, evolve, adapt, or just maybe learn to do something new, professional development. Coming off of these two issues that you had for the magazine, what was it what were some of the things that maybe were left in your mind as you think about what's maybe next in the FMB RTD space?
But one thing I can say is that we will never do another hard seltzer issue. And that as much as I think that it's important, valid, and that we shouldn't judge it from a consumer perspective, our audience did not respond well to it. That, you know, we just switched over on Friday to our yearly lager issue. And for example, that first day of sales that came off of the new lager issue in terms of subscriptions and whatnot, it was 3 times the same day, you know, that we had for this hard seltzer issue. So I think that, you know, there's that piece there. While it's valid as a part of what we cover and what we do, I don't know that amongst our audience of, you know, passionate brewers, that it's that exciting to them. That I don't think that they are as passionate about that product as they are about other forms that are, you know, more strictly within this kind of canon of beer. And so, you know, for us, we will continue to kind of balance that with that understanding, knowing that something can both simultaneously be important to an industry and important on the business coverage side, but also not that important or compelling on the enthusiast side. And we will continue to structure how we cover it thusly, knowing both of those things.
Kate, let's build off of what Jamie just said too, for those of us on the call who are thinking about stories and storytelling. From your reporting on these categories, what do you feel like you found is something that maybe resonates in terms of trying to think about what's next with these and telling those stories for readers? So not just looking at the category specifically from a consumer standpoint, but as a reporter, what stood out to you that maybe others can take away to help them?
I think what's been really interesting to me when I report on RTDs and FMBs is not just the final product, but the thought process that producers go through to get there, and like the R&D, the market testing, what goes into engineering these products. Creating a hard seltzer is a really interesting process. Creating FMBs is even more interesting, I think. And these beverages are kind of engineered in that they're not brewed. So it's like the thought process of, okay, maybe this is something my brewery should do, to, and now here is our new product. All the bad ideas, all the good ideas, all the audience research, all the tinkering in the actual brew house that goes into that is really fascinating. And the dead ends are almost as interesting as the angles that work. So to me, from like a storytelling perspective, I don't just want to know what is the product, but why that product makes sense for that particular company, what it's going to allow the company to do. Is it going to reach new drinkers? Is it going to just give existing drinkers another product to buy from this company? Like, what is this tool doing for you, has been a question that I've asked a lot that's yielded some really interesting answers.
And parallels very nicely where things were years ago with what we think about craft beer. You're talking about the why. Mm-hmm. Why is something fitting within this new scope of creation, in a similar way of when we're talking about why were things changing perhaps, 15, 20 years ago for this most recent collection of craft beer history. So with that, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Jess, for sharing your insight, expertise, and knowledge. Thanks to everybody for being on the call as well. We've got more of these coming up in May and June. I hope you can join. I hope everybody has a wonderful night. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.